Talia Brooks gripped the steering wheel of her sleek black sedan, the late afternoon sun blazing across the cracked asphalt of Harrow, Nevada's outskirts. She was 2 hours from a legal conference in Reno, a chance to network with federal prosecutors and flex her credentials as a U.S. attorney. Her GPS chirped 50 miles to destination. As she squinted at the horizon, a flat stretch of sagebrush and dust interrupted only by the occasional tumbleweed skittering across the road. Her stomach growled. She'd skipped lunch to make time, and the conference wasn't until tomorrow. A faded sign loomed ahead. Dusty Trails Diner, 3 miles, promising a quick stop for coffee and a sandwich. She flicked on her blinker, easing off the highway onto a gravel-strewn turnoff, tires crunching as she rolled into the diner's lot. The building squatted low, its peeling paint the color of sun-bleached bone, windows smudged with years of desert grit. 3 pickup trucks sat crookedly in the dirt, their beds piled with rusted tools and empty beer cans. Talia parked, smoothed her blazer, and stepped out, her polished heels sinking slightly into the uneven ground. The air smelled of gasoline and fried grease, thick and heavy in the 90-degree heat. Inside, the diner buzzed with a sluggish hum. Ceiling fans creaked overhead, stirring the stale air, while a jukebox in the corner wheezed out a twangy country tune. 3 white truckers sprawled at the counter, their flannel shirts stained with sweat, hats tilted low over weathered faces. They turned as one when Talia walked in, their eyes narrowing like hawks spotting prey. She caught the tallest one, a lanky man with a patchy beard, lean over to his buddy and mutter, "Ain't no place for her kind here." His voice carried just enough to sting, but Talia kept her chin up, stride steady as she approached the counter. She'd heard worse in her 32 years, backrooms in D.C., rural courthouses in Virginia, even her own law school. It was noise, nothing more. She slid onto a stool 2 seats down from the trio, her navy skirt brushing the cracked vinyl, and flagged the waitress. The woman shuffled over, a pinched-faced blonde in her 50s named Marge, according to the faded tag pinned to her apron. Her lips pursed as she sized Talia up, eyes flicking from her tailored blazer to the leather briefcase resting at her feet. "What do you want?" Marge asked, voice flat as the desert outside, pencil hovering over a notepad she didn't bother to use. Talia kept her tone even, professional. "Black coffee and a turkey sandwich, please." Marge snorted faintly, scribbling nothing, then turned to the coffee pot. The truckers kept staring, the lanky one elbowing his stocky friend who chuckled low in his throat. Talia ignored them, pulling out her phone to check emails, updates from her office, a memo on a trafficking case she'd been chasing for months. The screen glowed under the diner's dim lights, a lifeline to the world beyond this dusty speck of a town. Marge returned, coffee mug in hand, but as she set it down, her wrist twisted sharply. Scalding liquid splashed across Talia's lap, soaking through her skirt and searing her thighs. Pain shot through her, a hiss escaping her lips as she jolted back, chair scraping the linoleum. Marge stepped back, smirking. "Oops, clumsy me." The truckers erupted in laughter, the lanky one slapping the counter so hard his fork clattered to the floor. Talia's pulse spiked, heat blooming in her chest, not just from the burn, but from the smugness in Marge's eyes, the casual cruelty of it all. She stood, brushing at the stain, voice tight but controlled. "That wasn't an accident. I'd like an apology." Marge's smirk widened, her bony arms crossing. "I ain't apologizing for nothing. You want service, sit there and take it." The stocky trucker leaned forward, cracking his knuckles. "Better watch your tone, girl." Talia's jaw clenched, years of courtroom battles flashing through her. Mind, facing down smug defense attorneys, corrupt cops, juries who wouldn't meet her gaze. She wasn't here to grovel. "I don't care how you run this dump," she said, stepping closer, her 5'8" frame towering over Marge's slouch. "You don't get to treat me like trash and grin about it. Apologize now." The air thickened, the jukebox cutting off mid-note as if sensing the shift. The lanky trucker slid off his stool, boots thudding as he loomed behind her, breath sour with cheap beer. "You heard her," he growled. "Take it or leave." His hand shoved her shoulder, hard enough to make her stumble. Talia caught herself, instincts kicking in. She spun, shoving him back with both palms, sending him crashing into his stool. The stocky one lunged, grabbing her arm, and she yanked free, elbowing his gut. Chaos erupted, stools toppling, coffee, mugs shattering on the floor as the third trucker joined in. Swinging a wild fist, she ducked under. The diner's door slammed open, a gust of hot wind ushering in Sheriff Amos Tate. He was a bear of a man, 6'3", broad shoulders stretching his khaki uniform, badge glinting like a warning. His grey eyes locked on Talia, ignoring the truckers scrambling to their feet, the broken glass crunching under their boots. "What's this mess?" he barked, voice gravelly, hand already on his cuffs. Marge pointed a trembling finger at Talia, crocodile tears welling up. "She started it, Sheriff, came in here yelling, throwing punches." The lanky trucker nodded, clutching his side like he'd been stabbed. "Crazy woman attacked us for no reason." Talia stepped forward, palms up, breath steadying. "That's a lie. They harassed me, she burned me with coffee, and they put hands on me first. Check the cameras." Tate's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile, his meaty, hand clamping around her wrist before she could finish. "Ain't no cameras worth a damn here," he said, twisting her arm behind her back. Cold metal snapped around her wrists, the cuffs biting into her skin as he yanked her toward the door. "You're under arrest," Tate rumbled, dragging her outside as the truckers smirked, and Marge wiped her hands on her apron like she'd just taken out the trash. Talia's heels skidded on the gravel, her blazer catching on the doorframe, but she kept her voice firm. "On what charge?" "I defended myself." Tate shoved her against his patrol car, a rusted Ford with Harrow, Sheriff stenciled in peeling letters. "Assault, disturbance, whatever sticks," he said, slamming the door after forcing her into the back seat. The truckers whooped, one spitting tobacco juice into the dirt as Tate climbed in and gunned the engine. Talia's mind raced, the burn. On her thighs throbbing, her briefcase still inside the diner, evidence of who she was left behind. Through the window, Harrow's flat expanse blurred past, a prison of sand and prejudice she'd stumbled into. "You don't belong here," Tate muttered, eyes glinting in the rearview mirror, and she knew this was just the beginning of something uglier than she'd ever faced. The ride to the station was short, 5 miles of silence broken only by the crackle of Tate's radio and the occasional chuckle he let slip, like he was savoring some private joke. Talia sat rigid, cuffs cutting into her wrists, mentally cataloguing every move, the coffee spill, the shove, the lies. She'd seen setups before, clients railroaded by small-town sheriffs with too much power and too little oversight, but being the target was a different beast. The station loomed ahead, a squat cinder-block building baking under the relentless sun, its flagpole bent from years of wind. Tate hauled her out, his grip bruising her arm as he marched her inside, past a desk clerk who didn't even look up. "Booker," he snapped, shoving her toward a cell door. The lock clanged shut behind her, and she stood there, blazer torn, coffee stain darkening her skirt, staring at the man who'd just lit the match to her nightmare. This wasn't about a diner scuffle anymore. It was about who she was and what Harrow would do to bury her for it. Talia Brooks stood in the cramped cell of Harrow's jail, the air thick with the sour tang of mildew and sweat. The walls, stained grey with years of neglect, pressed in around her, the single bulb overhead flickering like a dying firefly. Her wrists ached, the cuffs from Sheriff Amos Tate's rough arrest, leaving red welts that pulsed with every heartbeat. She paced the 6x8 space, heels clicking on the concrete, her torn blazer hanging off one shoulder, coffee stains stiffening the fabric of her skirt. The burn on her thighs still stung, a cruel reminder of the Dusty Trails diner, where a simple stop had spiraled into this nightmare. Through the bars, she glimpsed Tate at his desk, hunched over a typewriter, his thick fingers pecking out a report. She squinted, catching fragments. Aggressive black woman attacked locals unprovoked. Her stomach twisted, a cold fury rising as she watched him spin lies into official ink. This wasn't just an arrest, it was a setup, and she was the bullseye. She stepped to the bars, gripping them until her knuckles paled. "I want my phone call," she said, voice sharp as a blade, cutting through the station's stale silence. "You can't hold me without due process. I know my rights." Tate didn't look up, just smirked, his jowls quivering as he tapped another key. "Rights don't apply to troublemakers like you," he drawled, finally meeting her gaze with eyes like chipped flint. "You assaulted 3 good folks, disturbed the peace. That's plenty to keep you locked up till the judge says otherwise." Talia's pulse hammered, her legal mind racing. No witnesses had been questioned, no evidence collected beyond the trucker's word and Marge's crocodile tears. "You didn't even investigate," she shot back, leaning closer, the metal cool against her palms. "You took their story and ran with it. That's not law, that's bias." Tate chuckled, a low rumble that made her skin crawl, and stood, his bulk filling the room. "Investigation's done, sweetheart. You're the one in cuffs, not them." Cell door rattled as a deputy shuffled in. A wiry kid no older than 25, his badge reading Clyde. His brown eyes darted nervously between Talia and Tate, a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the chill. He carried a tray with a tin cup of water and a stale biscuit, sliding it through the slot with trembling hands. Tate lumbered back to his desk, muttering, "Feed her and shut her up." As Clyde lingered, Talia caught his gaze, softening her tone. "You know this isn't right," she said, barely above a whisper. "He's burying me for nothing." Clyde flinched, glancing over his shoulder, then slipped a hand into his pocket. He pulled out a battered burner phone, its screen cracked but glowing, and pressed it into her palm through the bars. "Tate's got the judge in his pocket," he hissed, voice low and urgent. "Crane'll bury you deeper. Use this quick." Before she could respond, he scurried off, boots echoing down the hall. Talia's heart thudded as she ducked into the cell's shadowed corner, the phone's dim light casting jagged patterns on her face. She punched in a number she knew by heart, Lena. Pierce, her colleague at the U.S. Attorney's Office, a woman who'd fought beside her through cases that made headlines. The line crackled, then clicked. "Talia?" Lena's voice cut through, crisp and alarmed. "Where are you? Your GPS pinged off in the middle of nowhere." Talia kept her voice steady, though her grip on the phone tightened. "Harrow, Nevada. Sheriff arrested me after a diner fight. 3 truckers jumped me and he's pinning it all on me. Fabricating reports, no evidence. I need you to pull strings, Lena. This place is rotten." Lena cursed softly, the sound of keys clacking in. The background. "I'll call the DOJ, get a misconduct file started. What's the sheriff's name?" "Amos Tate," Talia replied, glancing at the desk where Tate now sipped coffee, oblivious. "And the judge is Virgil Crane. They're tight. Crane's dirty, I can feel it." Lena's tone hardened. "Stay sharp. I'll dig into Crane's record. We'll get you out." The call ended with a faint beep, and Talia slid the phone under the bench, her mind spinning. Lena was a bulldog, 5 years younger than Talia's 32, but with a nose for corruption that had toppled bigger fish than Tate. If anyone could crack this, it was her. For a moment, hope flickered, a thin thread in the darkness. She could almost taste freedom, see herself walking out of this hellhole with her head high, Tate's smug face crumbling. But then the station's front door banged open, and that thread snapped. Tate stormed down the hall, his boots pounding like thunder, eyes blazing with something feral. "Who'd you talk to?" he roared, slamming a fist against the bars, the clang reverberating in her skull. She stood, chin up, but her pulse spiked as he reached through, snatching the burner phone from its hiding spot. He'd seen Clyde, she realized, caught the kid's nervous fidgeting, pieced it together. Tate held the phone aloft, his meaty paw crushing it until plastic splintered and the screen went black. Shards rained to the floor, glinting in the flickering, light as he leaned in, breath hot with rage. "You think you're slick, huh? Calling your city friends to save you?" He tossed the wreckage aside, his sneer twisting into a promise. "You'll pay for that, lawyer lady. I'll make sure you rot in here till you're begging to confess." Talia didn't flinch, though her stomach churned. "You can't scare me into silence," she said, voice ice-cold, meeting his glare head-on. "This is bigger than you now." Tate's laugh was a guttural bark, his fist slamming the bars again, hard enough to rattle her teeth. "Bigger? You don't even know what you've stepped in. Tomorrow Crane'll chew you up and I'll be there laughing." He turned, stomping back to his desk, leaving her alone with the echo of his threat. Talia sank onto the bench, the cold concrete biting through her skirt, her mind racing faster than ever. Tate wasn't bluffing. Crane was his ace, a judge who'd rubber stamp whatever lies Tate fed him. She'd seen it before in backwater towns, sheriffs and judges in lockstep, crushing anyone who didn't fit their mold. But she wasn't just anyone. She was a U.S. attorney, trained to dismantle corruption, not bow to it. Clyde's warning burned in her ears. Crane'll bury you deeper. How deep did this go? Was it just a diner brawl gone wrong, or had she stumbled into something uglier, something Harrow would kill to protect? She rubbed her wrists, the welts throbbing, and vowed to fight. Tate could smash phones, but he couldn't smash her will. Not yet. What do you think? Can a small-town sheriff like Tate really outmuscle a U.S. attorney, or is Talia's grit enough to turn the tables? Comment number 1 if you believe she's got the fight to break free. Hit like and subscribe for more of this wild ride. We're just getting started. Now what's waiting for her in that courtroom? Justice or a trap she can't outsmart? The morning sun barely pierced the haze over Harrow, Nevada, as Sheriff Amos Tate yanked Talia Brooks from her cell. Her wrists throbbed, the welts from his cuffs now purpled and raw, her blazer hanging in tatters from a sleepless night on the jail's concrete bench. He gripped her arm, fingers digging into her flesh, and hauled her through the station's back door, where a patrol car idled, exhaust curling into the dry air. "Time to face justice," he growled, shoving her into the back seat, her knees banging against the metal divider. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the scratched window, coffee-stained skirt, hair matted with sweat, eyes burning with defiance. The drive to the courthouse was a blur of dust and sagebrush, 5 minutes that felt like an eternity, Tate's radio crackling with static as he hummed a tuneless song, his smugness a silent taunt. She clenched her fists, nails biting her palms, mentally rehearsing every statute she'd memorized in law school. This wasn't just a trial, it was a war, and she'd fight with everything she had. The Harrow County Courthouse loomed ahead, a squat brick building with chipped columns and a faded American flag drooping in the still heat. Tate dragged her up the steps, her heels scraping the stone, and through double doors into a lobby thick with the scent of old wood and stale coffee. Deputies flanked her, their boots thudding in sync as they marched her into the courtroom. The space was small, 30 feet across, with scuffed pews packed with locals, mostly white, mostly men, their faces carved with curiosity and contempt. Judge Virgil Crane sat high on the bench, a grizzled figure in black robes, his thinning, grey hair plastered to a scalp mottled with age spots. His eyes, cold and unblinking, fixed on Talia as Tate uncuffed her and shoved her toward the defense table. She stumbled, catching herself on the edge, and stood tall, smoothing her blazer's torn sleeve. Crane's sneer deepened, a silent promise of what was to come. Prosecutor Jed Hargrove strode in, a slick white man in a pinstripe suit that screamed money, his blonde hair gelled back, a predator's grin stretching his lips. He nodded to Crane, a flicker of familiarity passing between them, then turned to Talia, sizing her up like a hunter eyeing a trapped deer. "Morning, Miss Brooks," he drawled, voice smooth as oil, setting a stack of files on his table. She didn't respond, her gaze sweeping the room. The all-white jury, 12 stone-faced locals with folded arms, their whispers buzzing like flies. The bailiff called order, and Crane banged his gavel, the crack echoing off the paneled walls. "State of Nevada versus Talia Brooks," he barked, flipping open a folder with exaggerated boredom. "Assault and public disturbance. Let's make this quick." Talia's pulse quickened, her legal instincts kicking in. Quick meant rigged, and she wasn't about to let it slide. Hargrove stood, adjusting his tie, exuding confidence as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. Yesterday, at Dusty Trail's diner, Miss Brooks stormed in, verbally accosted the staff, and physically assaulted 3 innocent patrons. We've got witnesses who'll swear to it." He waved a hand, and the first trucker from the diner, the lanky one with the patchy beard, shuffled to the stand, his flannel shirt wrinkled but his story polished. "She came in yelling, cussing us out," he said, voice thick with feigned outrage. "I told her to calm down and she shoved me into the counter, started swinging wild." Talia's jaw tightened, her burn scars itching under her skirt. She rose, heels clicking as she faced Crane. "Objection, Your Honor, that's a fabrication. I request the diner's security footage to disprove this." Hargrove smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Funny thing, Judge, the camera's been broke for weeks. No footage to show." Crane didn't even glance at her, his gavel hovering. "Overruled. No evidence, no discussion. Sit down, Miss Brooks." Talia's blood simmered, but she stayed standing, voice steady. "Then I demand to cross-examine." Crane's eyes narrowed, but he nodded curtly. She stepped forward, staring down the trucker. "You say I attacked unprovoked. Did you mention how your friend grabbed me first, or how the waitress burned me with coffee?" The man squirmed, scratching his beard. "Didn't happen like that. You're twisting it." She pressed harder. "So you didn't mutter slurs under your breath when I walked in?" His face reddened, but Hargrove leapt up. "Objection! Speculation!" Crane banged the gavel again. "Sustained. Move on or sit, Miss Brooks." She bit back a retort, returning to her seat, the jury's smirks widening. They weren't listening. They'd already decided. Next came Marge, the pinched-faced waitress, her apron swapped for a floral dress, eyes glistening with rehearsed tears. "She was rude from the start," Marge sniffled, dabbing her cheeks with a tissue. "Ordered me around like I was her maid, then started a fight when I wouldn't take it." Talia stood again, fists clenched at her sides. "That's a lie. You spilled coffee on me deliberately, my skirt's still stained. Explain that." Marge blinked, crocodile tears faltering. "Accident. You got mad and caused a scene." Talia turned to Crane. "Your Honor, I request a recess to retrieve my briefcase from the diner. It's got my ID, proving who I am." Hargrove chuckled, cutting in. "No briefcase was logged, Judge. Must have imagined it." Crane's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Denied. No proof, no recess." The third trucker, the stocky one, took the stand, clutching his gut like Talia had stabbed him. "She elbowed me hard, kept swinging till the sheriff showed up, crazy lady." Talia fired back. "You grabbed my arm first. Self-defense isn't assault." "Where's the investigation report?" Hargrove waved a dismissive hand. "Sheriff Tate handled it, all in order." Crane nodded, scribbling something, his bias a brick wall she couldn't crack. She fought on, citing statutes. Nevada revised. Statutes 200-471 on assault, the Fourth Amendment on unlawful arrest. But each objection was a pebble against a fortress. "Overruled," Crane droned, his voice a monotone hammer. "Evidence only, not speeches." The jury shifted, some smirking outright, their eyes glinting with something darker than disbelief, satisfaction, just when Talia thought she'd gained. A sliver of ground, Tate sauntered in from the back, his khaki uniform crisp despite the heat, a manila envelope tucked under his arm. He approached the bench, leaning close to Crane, their whispers a private counsel she couldn't hear. Hargrove stood, grinning wider than ever. "Your Honor, new evidence from Sheriff Tate." Crane opened the envelope, pulling out a single sheet, his sneer deepening as he read aloud. "Addendum to the report. Witness claims Miss Brooks assaulted an officer during arrest." Talia's breath caught, her mind reeling. "That's impossible," she shouted, surging to her feet. "I never touched him. He cuffed me without resistance." Tate met her gaze, his grey eyes cold as steel. "Got a deputy who says different," he said, voice flat, daring her to prove otherwise. Crane held up the paper, a forged assault charge scrawled in black ink, the ink still wet enough to smudge. "This changes things," he said, tossing it to the bailiff. "Added to the charges, sit down, Miss Brooks, or I'll hold you in contempt." Talia sank into her chair, heart pounding, the room tilting as the jury's smirks turned to nods. She'd walked into a trap, every move she made twisting tighter around her neck. Tate lingered by the door, arms crossed, his bulk a silent promise of more to come. Hargrove shuffled his files, smugness radiating off him, while Crane leaned back, gavel tapping the bench like a countdown. The trial wasn't just rigged, it was a slaughter, and she was the lamb. But she wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. This new charge was a lie, a desperate jab from Tate, and she'd claw her way out even if it meant tearing this courtroom apart brick by brick. The Harrow County Courthouse buzzed with a low hum as Talia Brooks sat at the defense table, her torn blazer itching against her skin, the coffee stain on her skirt a dark badge of the fight that had landed her here. Judge Virgil Crane loomed. Above, his gavel poised like a guillotine, while Prosecutor Jed Hargrove lounged in his chair, flipping through files with a grin that said he'd already won. The all-white jury stared at Talia, their eyes glinting with a mix of boredom and disdain, arms crossed tight over faded flannel shirts and work vests. She'd spent the last hour dismantling lies, the trucker's fabricated punches, Marge's crocodile tears, Sheriff Amos Tate's forged assault charge, but every word she'd thrown at Crane had bounced off his stone-cold bias. Her wrists throbbed, the welts from Tate's cuffs a constant ache, but she kept her spine straight, her gaze locked on the judge. This was her last stand before the verdict, and she wasn't about to crumble. Crane cleared his throat, the sound a dry rasp that silenced the room. "Jury, you've heard the evidence," he said, his voice heavy with finality, flipping shut the folder with Tate's addendum. "Take it, deliberate, and bring me something quick." The 12 shuffled out, boots scuffing the worn hardwood, their whispers trailing behind like a venomous wind. Talia's pulse hammered, her legal mind ticking through every angle she'd missed, cross-examinations cut short, footage denied, objections overruled. 10 minutes ticked by, the clock above Crane's bench groaning with each second, and she knew what was coming. In D.C., she'd seen juries deliberate for days over less. Here, 10 minutes meant the fix was in. She rubbed her palms together, the burn scars on her thighs prickling under her skirt, a reminder of the diner where this nightmare had ignited. Tate stood by the door, his khaki bulk a silent threat, grey eyes glinting with triumph. The jury filed back in, their faces blank as granite. The foreman, a wiry man with a buzz cut and a sunburned neck, clutching a slip of paper. Crane banged his gavel, the crack a gunshot in the stifling air. "Verdict," he barked, leaning forward, his sneer deepening. The foreman stood, voice flat. "We find the defendant, Talia Brooks, guilty on all counts, assault, public disturbance, and assaulting an officer." Gasps rippled through the pews, locals nodding like they'd expected nothing less, Hargrove's grin stretching wider. Talia's chest tightened, fury boiling up her throat, but she rose, steadying herself on the table's edge, her heels grinding into the floor. "Your Honor," she said, voice cutting through the murmurs, "before you sentence me, there's something you need to know." The room stilled, every eye snapping to her, even Crane's cold stare flickering with curiosity. She took a breath, then dropped the bomb. "I'm a U.S. attorney." Shock slammed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Hargrove's pen clattered to the table, the jury's smugness faltered, and the locals' whispers erupted into a chaotic buzz. A woman, in the back, gasped loud enough to echo, her hand flying to her mouth. Talia stood taller, letting the weight of her title sink in, expecting the revelation to crack Crane's armor, maybe force a mistrial. She'd spent years building that badge. Harvard Law, clerking for a federal judge, prosecuting traffickers, across state lines, and here in this dusty trap it was her ace. But Crane didn't flinch. His sneer curled into a scoff, his gavel tapping the bench like a bored child's toy. "Means nothing here," he said, voice dripping with contempt. "Fancy titles don't change facts. Guilty's guilty. Sentencing's. At dawn tomorrow, take her away." Talia's stomach dropped, her moment of triumph souring into disbelief. She'd played her card and they'd laughed it off. Tate surged forward, cuffs dangling from his meaty paw, his smirk a blade twisting. "In her gut. Told you Crane'd chew you up," he muttered, snapping the metal around her wrists tighter than before, the steel biting into her welts. She winced, but didn't break eye contact, her defiance a silent vow. He hauled her out, the courtroom's chatter swelling behind her, locals murmuring serves her right, and outsider got what she deserved. But as the door swung shut, Talia caught a different sound. Hurried footsteps, pens scratching, phones buzzing. Reporters in the back row, 3 of them, slipped out, their notepads stuffed with the story of a U.S. attorney railroaded in a nowhere town. She'd lit a spark, even if Crane and Tate didn't see it yet. They thought they'd buried her, but the world outside Harrow was starting to listen. Meanwhile, 50 miles away in Reno, Lena Pierce slammed her laptop shut, her dark curls bouncing as she grabbed her keys and bolted from her hotel room. She'd been at the legal conference Talia was headed for, expecting her friend to roll in with her usual sharp wit and sharper cases. But Talia's call from the jail's burner phone had flipped everything. Harrow, Tate, Crane, a setup so blatant it stank. Lena's rental car roared onto the highway, tires eating up the asphalt as she dialed her DOJ contact, a gruff ex-Marine named Carl. "Talia's in deep," she said, voice tight, weaving through traffic. "Sheriff's fabricating charges. Judge is dirty. I need Crane's record, every ruling, every whisper of corruption." Carl grunted. "Harrow's a black hole. Crane's been untouchable for decades. I'll dig, but it'll take time." Lena's jaw clenched. "She doesn't have time. Get it to me by tonight." Back in Harrow, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the jail's cinder-block walls in streaks of orange and shadow. Talia sat on her cell's bench, wrists throbbing, replaying the trial. Crane's sneer, Hargrove's lies, Tate's forged paper. She'd thought her title would shift the tide, force a pause, maybe scare them into backing off. Instead, it had painted a bigger target on her back. Footsteps echoed down the hall, slow and deliberate, and her head snapped up. Tate appeared, a hulking silhouette against the flickering bulb, his keys jingling like a taunt. "Sleep tight, lawyer lady," he said, voice low and venomous. "Dawn's gonna be a reckoning." He turned to leave, but not before slipping a note under Lena's car door 50 miles away, parked outside a gas station where she'd stopped to refuel. She found it minutes later, tires slashed, the paper scrawled in block letters. "Leave, or she's dead." Lena's breath caught, her fingers crumpling the threat, but her eyes hardened. She wasn't running. She was racing to Harrow, and Tate had just made it personal. Talia leaned back against the cell wall, the cold seeping through her blazer, her mind churning. The reporters were her lifeline. Word was spreading. Pressure. Building. Lena was coming, the DOJ stirring. She'd planted a seed, and it was sprouting faster than Tate or Crane could stomp it out. But dawn loomed, and with it, Crane's sentence. They'd dismissed her title, tightened the noose, and now Tate was out there, slashing tires, drawing bloodlines. She'd thought she'd won a hidden triumph, a crack in their armor, but the counterattack was already rolling. Her victory was a mirage, and the real fight was about to explode. Should Talia have seen Crane's stonewall coming, or was her U.S. attorney reveal a gamble worth taking? Comment number 1, if you think she's still got a shot to turn this around, hit like and subscribe. We're diving deeper into this twisted tale. What's Tate planning with that dawn sentencing? Will Talia walk out, or will Harrow bury her for good? The Harrow jail cell was a tomb of shadows as midnight crept in, the flickering bulb overhead buzzing like a trapped wasp. Talia Brooks paced the narrow space, her torn blazer dangling off her shoulders, the coffee stain on her skirt a stiff crust against her burned thighs. Her wrists pulsed with pain, the welts from Sheriff Amos Tate's cuffs now swollen and bruised, but her mind was a steel trap, replaying the courtroom farce, Judge Virgil Crane's sneer, the guilty verdict, her U.S. attorney bombshell that had sparked whispers but no salvation. Sentencing loomed at dawn, and she knew Crane wouldn't just lock her up. He'd bury her under lies thick enough to choke out her career. She stopped pacing, leaning against the cold cinder-block wall, plotting her appeal. The reporters had bolted with her story, headlines brewing, pressure mounting. Lena Pierce was out there digging into Crane's dirt. She had a lifeline, thin but real, and she'd cling to it until her knuckles bled. A faint clatter broke her. Thoughts? The station's front door creaking open, boots scuffing the concrete floor. Talia's head snapped up, senses sharpening as two silhouettes loomed in the hallway, their faces shrouded by black ski masks. Her pulse spiked, every muscle tensing as they moved with purpose, a crowbar glinting in one's hand. The lock clicked, the cell door swinging wide, and before she could shout, they lunged. The first grabbed her arms, his grip iron tight, while the second clamped a sweaty palm over her mouth, muffling her cry. "Crane says shut your mouth," the muffled voice snarled, hot breath seeping through the mask. She twisted, kicking hard, her heel slamming into the first man's shin, but they dragged her down the hall past Tate's empty desk and out a side exit into the night. The desert air hit her like a slap, dry and biting, stars glaring down on Harrow's outskirts. A battered van idled in the dirt lot, its engine growling low, exhaust curling into the darkness. They hurled her inside, the floor rusted and slick with oil, the door slamming shut as the van lurched forward. Talia scrambled to her knees, fists clenched, but the masked men pinned her down, their weight crushing her chest. "You talk too much," the second one hissed, his fist crashing into her jaw, splitting her lip. Blood flooded her mouth, coppery and warm, as another blow landed, on her ribs, knocking the wind from her lungs. She fought back, years of self-defense training surging through her. Her elbow smashed into the first man's nose, a wet crunch followed by a howl as he reeled back, clutching his face. The second hesitated, and she seized the moment, rolling. Free and lunging for the van's rear door, her fingers grazed the handle when the driver, a third shadow, gunned the engine, swerving sharp. She crashed against the wall, shoulder-slamming metal, but adrenaline kept her moving. She kicked the door open, the hinges screaming, and leapt as the van hit a rut, tumbling into the sand. Pain exploded in her knees, grit tearing at her palms. But she staggered up, sprinting into the desert. Behind her, tires screeched, the van skidding to a halt as the men spilled out, cursing loud enough to wake the dead. "Get her!" one roared, flashlight beams slicing the night, pinning her silhouette against the dunes. She dove behind a jagged boulder, breath ragged, tasting blood and dust. Her blazer snagged on thorns, ripping further, but she didn't. Care survival trumped everything now. The men fanned out, boots crunching gravel, their beams sweeping closer. Talia crawled, belly low, sand clogging her lungs, until she spotted a faint glow, a gas station flickering on the horizon, maybe 2 miles off. She bolted, legs burning, every step a gamble as shouts echoed behind her. "She's heading west," one yelled, and then a sharper sound cut the air, a gunshot, the crack splitting the silence. She ducked, a bullet whizzing past, pinging off a rock 5 feet away. Her heart hammered, but she didn't stop, weaving through scrub and cacti, the station's neon sign growing brighter. Another shot rang out, sand spraying her calves, and she dove behind a rusted oil drum, just as the pumps came into view. The men were closing in, flashlights bobbing like vultures circling a kill. The station was a relic. 2 pumps, a flickering open sign, a payphone bolted to the wall under a cracked awning. Talia stumbled to it, hands shaking as she fished a quarter from her pocket, the coin slick with sweat and blood. She dialed. Lena, the ringtone a lifeline in the chaos, her eyes darting to the desert where beams danced closer. "Talia?" Lena's voice crackled through, sharp with panic. "Where are you? I'm halfway to Harrow, tires slashed, but I've got a rental." Talia gripped the receiver, voice low and urgent. "Gas station west of town. Tate's men jumped me, tried to kill me. Crane's behind it." Lena cursed, loud enough to distort the line. "I'm 20 minutes out. Hide, they're not stopping." Talia's breath hitched as she relayed the bombshell she'd pieced together in the van. Cranes tied to a land grab. Black farmers. Losing plots to some scheme, that's why they want me gone. Headlights flared, cutting off Lena's reply. A sheriff's cruiser roaring into the lot, dust billowing under its tires. Talia dropped the receiver, ducking behind the dumpster as Tate's deputies leapt out. Guns drawn, their shouts drowned by the engine's growl. "She's here!" one barked, beam sweeping the pumps, catching her shadow for a split second. She bolted, diving behind a stack of tires as bullets punched the metal, sparks flying in the dark. Her chest heaved, blood dripping from her lip, staining the sand. But she crawled, inching toward a ditch as the deputies closed in. Shots peppered the ground, one grazing her arm, a hot streak of pain that made her bite back a scream. She rolled, into the ditch, heart pounding. The gas station's glow fading as the men circled like wolves. Talia pressed against the dirt, shallow breaths blending with the wind, her mind racing. Crane hadn't just dismissed her title, he'd ordered her silenced, a midnight hit to crush her before dawn's sentencing. The land grab tied it together, Harrow's black farmers, their deeds stolen, Crane's pockets lined with dirty cash. She'd stumbled into a hornet's nest, and they'd stung hard. Her arm bled, soaking her sleeve, but she tore a strip from her blazer, tying it tight, wincing as the fabric bit into the wound. The deputies' voices faded, their beams swinging east, assuming she'd kept running. She waited, counting seconds, then staggered up, limping toward a cluster of Joshua trees, the gas station a distant flicker. Lena was coming, the DOJ stirring, but Tate's men were relentless, and dawn was hours away. She'd escaped, for now, but the desert was a battlefield, and they'd hunt her till she dropped. Talia Brooks stumbled through the Nevada desert, the night air sharp against her blood-streaked face, her torn blazer flapping like a wounded bird. Her arm throbbed where a bullet had grazed it, the makeshift bandage, a strip of fabric ripped from her sleeve, soaked crimson and clinging to the wound. Her lip was split, tasting of copper, and her ribs ached from the masked men's blows in the van she'd barely escaped. The gas station shootout lingered in her ears, deputies' bullets pinging off metal, their shouts fading as she'd crawled into the shadows. She limped toward a faint rumble, headlights slicing the darkness. A semi-truck rolling slow along a dirt road, its chrome grille glinting under the moon. She waved her good arm, desperation overriding caution, and the truck screeched to a halt, dust swirling around her like a shroud. The driver's door swung open, and a burly black man in his 50s climbed down, his denim jacket patched at the elbows, a grey beard framing a weathered face. "You look like hell," he said, voice gravelly but warm, eyes widening at her battered state. "Name's Otis. What happened?" Talia steadied her breath, leaning against the truck's fender, sand caked in her hair. "Sheriff's men tried to kill me," she said, voice hoarse but firm. "I'm Talia Brooks, U.S. Attorney. They're after me because I know too much." Otis whistled low, scratching his beard, then nodded toward the cab. "Get in. I'll hide you." "Ain't right. What they're doing." Relief washed over her, a fragile thread of trust. She climbed up, wincing as her ribs protested, and sank into the passenger seat, the leather cool against her burns. Otis gunned the engine, the truck rumbling west, away from Harrow's grip. "Got a halt to Vegas," he said, keeping his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. "You can rest till we figure this out." Talia nodded, exhaustion tugging at her bones, but her mind raced. She pulled out the gas station payphones. Memory, Lena Pierce, 20 minutes out, now probably closer, hunting for her. "I need to call my colleague," she said, fishing for her pocket, but her phone was gone, lost in the van or the desert. Otis glanced over, pulling a cracked flip phone from his dash. "Use mine. Ain't fancy, but it works." She dialed. "Lena," the line crackling before her friend's voice burst through, tight with worry. "Talia, where are you?" "I'm in Harrow. Gas station's a war zone." Talia gripped the phone, glancing at Otis, who nodded encouragingly. "In a truck heading west. Safe for now. Cranes behind a land grab, black farmers, stolen deeds. That's the core of this." Lena's breath hissed through the line, keys clacking in the background. "I've got DOJ docs. Crane's rulings favor a developer, Harrow Holdings every time. Farmers lose, he wins. I'm filing an emergency complaint tonight." Talia's pulse quickened, hope flaring. "Good. Link it to Tate. He's Crane's muscle. They'll bury me at dawn if we don't move fast." Otis chimed in, voice low. "My cousin lost his plot last year. Crane signed it off, no questions." Talia relayed that to Lena, who cursed. "Pattern's solid. Stay hidden. I'll push this through." The call ended, and Talia sank back, thinking she'd found a sanctuary, a moment to breathe. Otis's story matched. Harrow was a machine, chewing up black lives for profit, and she'd just wedged a crowbar into its gears. The truck rolled on, headlights carving a path through the night, the desert stretching endless on both sides. Otis turned off the highway, tires crunching onto a gravel track, the cab jostling over ruts. "Shortcut," he muttered, nodding toward a looming shape, a barn, weathered red paint peeling off its boards, a single bulb swinging above the door. "Safe spot to lay low till your friend sorts it." Talia's gut twinged, unease prickling her spine, but exhaustion dulled her instincts. She nodded, trusting his weathered kindness, the shared rage in his eyes. He parked, climbing out, and she followed, limping across the dirt, sand grinding into her cuts. The barn door creaked open, revealing a cavern of shadows. Hay bales stacked high, the air thick with dust and old wood. Otis flicked on a lantern, its glow casting jagged shapes, and Talia stepped inside, her heels sinking into the straw-strewn floor. "Rest here," he said, pointing to a crate. "I'll keep watch." She sank down, ribs screaming, and closed her eyes for a moment, the DOJ complaint a lifeline in her mind. Crane was cracking, Tate scrambling. She could almost taste victory. But then the barn door slammed shut, the lock clicking loud enough to jolt her upright. Otis spun, his warmth gone, replaced by a cold smirk as Prosecutor Jed Hargrove stepped from the shadows, his pinstripe suit pristine, a cattle prod sparking in his hand. "Thought you'd slip away, huh?" Hargrove sneered, circling her like a vulture. Talia's heart sank, betrayal slicing deeper than her wounds. Otis had sold her out. "Drop the feds or your fertilizer," Hargrove hissed, jabbing the prod at her, its blue arc snapping inches from her chest. Talia lunged to her feet, pain be damned, and charged, her knee slamming into his groin. He doubled over, gasping, and she snatched the prod, jamming it into his ribs. Sparks flew, his body jerking as he collapsed, unconscious, his suit crumpling into the hay. Otis roared, rushing her, but she swung the prod again, catching his arm, enough to stagger him. She bolted for the door, kicking it open, only to freeze. As sirens wailed, red and blue lights flooding the barn. Tate's cruiser screeched up, deputies piling out, guns drawn. "Hargrove's down!" one shouted, and Talia's blood ran cold. They'd frame her for this, twist her escape into murder. She dove behind a hay bale as bullets tore through the wood, splinters raining down, her mind racing. Otis had played her, his cousin's story, a lure to earn her trust, a trap set by Crane's machine. The DOJ complaint was filed, but here, in this barn, she was a fugitive, Hargrove's limp body a noose tightening around her neck. Deputies stormed in, boots pounding, and she crawled, prod still clutched, slipping out a back window as glass shattered behind her. The night swallowed her again, but the sirens screamed louder, Tate's voice barking orders. She'd thought Otis was her sanctuary, a brother in the fight. Now she was running, bleeding, framed for a crime she didn't commit, the dawn sentencing a distant threat compared to the hell breaking loose now. Can you believe Otis flipped on Talia after all? That, or was she too quick to trust a stranger in this racist hellhole? Comment number 1 if you think she should have seen the double cross coming. Hit like and subscribe. This story's spiraling into madness. Will Talia outrun Tate's frame-up? Or is Hargrove's death the nail in her coffin she can't dodge? Talia Brooks burst from the barn's back window, glass shards slicing her palms as she hit the desert floor, rolling into the sand with a grunt. Her ribs screamed, bruised from the van beating, her arm bleeding fresh from the graze she'd bandaged hours ago. The cattle prod clattered beside her, its sparks dead, useless now. She kicked it away, staggering to her feet as sirens wailed behind her. Sheriff Amos Tate's deputies swarmed the barn, their shouts piercing the night. She took out Hargrove, twisting her desperate fight into a murder rap. Jed Hargrove lay unconscious in the hay, Otis's betrayal a fresh wound deeper than any bullet. Her blazer hung in tatters, coffee stains stiff on her skirt. But she ran, legs pumping through the scrub, the desert a black sea under a moonless sky. Headlights flared, engines roared. Tate wasn't letting her slip away this time. She spotted a motorcycle leaning against a shed 50 yards off, its chrome glinting faintly, keys dangling from the ignition. Otis's ride, left unguarded in the chaos. Talia sprinted, sand clogging her lungs, and threw herself onto the seat, twisting the key. The engine coughed, then roared to life, a beast waking under her hands. She gunned it, tires spitting gravel as she tore onto Harrow's backroads, wind whipping her hair into a wild tangle. Above, a chopper buzzed, its spotlight slashing the dunes, pinning her shadow for a heartbeat before she swerved into a dry wash, the bike jolting over rocks. Bullets cracked the air, one pinging the fender, and she hunched low, teeth gritted, the burn scars on her thighs pulsing with every bounce. Tate's voice crackled through a megaphone, distorted but venomous. "You're done, Brooks. Nowhere to run." The wash spat her onto a winding road, scrub giving way to scattered trailers and rusted cars, Harrow's fringes, a maze of poverty and neglect. She weaved through, the chopper's beam losing her in the clutter, its roar fading as she pushed west. Her mind raced. Lena Pierce had filed the DOJ complaint. Crane's land grab exposed, but Hargrove's frame-up flipped her from victim to cop killer. She needed shelter, evidence, a lifeline. A neon sign flickered ahead. Motel 6, its lot half empty. A refuge if she could reach it. She ditched the bike behind a dumpster, its engine ticking hot, and limped to the office, blood dripping from her palm onto the cracked pavement. The clerk, a pimply kid with headphones, barely glanced up as she slapped a 20 on the counter. "Room now," she rasped, voice raw, and he slid her a key. "Room 12, second floor." Talia bolted upstairs, locking the door behind her, the room a stale box of peeling wallpaper and moth-eaten curtains. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself, on the sink splashing water on her face, the cold stinging her split lip. That knock rattled the door, sharp and urgent. She froze, hand reaching for a lamp as a weapon, but Lena's voice hissed through. "Talia, it's me. Open up." Relief crashed over her, and she yanked the door wide, pulling Lena inside. Her friend's curls were wild, eyes bloodshot from the drive, a thick folder under her arm. DOJ docs, printed and dog-eared. "Jesus, you're a mess," Lena said, dropping the folder on the bed. "Tate's men shot up a gas station. Now they're saying you attacked Hargrove. What the hell happened?" Talia sank onto the mattress, recounting the barn. Otis's double cross, Hargrove's prod, the frame-up. "Crane's desperate," she said, voice steady despite the pain. "He knows the DOJ's sniffing. This is his kill shot." Lena nodded, flipping open the folder, papers spilling out. Court. Rulings, bank transfers, deeds. Crane's been greenlighting Harrow Holdings for years. Black farmers evicted, land sold cheap. Tate's the enforcer, Hargrove the grease. We've got enough for a federal probe. Talia's eyes lit, a spark of fight reigniting. Then, "We broadcast it. Blow it wide open before they bury me." Lena pulled a burner laptop from her bag, its screen glowing as she hacked a Wi-Fi signal from the motel's office. "Got a live stream ready. DOJ's watching. Press 2. Upload." These and Crane's toast. Talia scanned the docs, Crane's signature on eviction orders, payments traced to a shell company, Tate's name on witness lists. Her fingers flew, uploading each file to a public server, her voice steady as she recorded a clip. "I'm Talia Brooks, U.S. Attorney, framed by Harrow's corrupt elite. This is their racket. Land stolen, lives ruined. Help me stop it." She hit send, the stream pinging across networks, views ticking up, 10, 50, 200 in minutes. Lena grinned. "It's working. Reporters are biting." Talia exhaled, thinking she'd turned the tide, the world finally seeing Harrow's rot. But then the screen flickered, static cutting her voice mid-sentence. Replaced by grainy footage, her swinging the prod at Hargrove, edited to look like a cold-blooded attack, his body limp in the hay. Her stomach dropped, Lena cursing as the stream hijacked, views spiked, comments flooding. "Killer! Lock her up." Tate's voice broke through, a pre-recorded taunt. Talia Brooks confesses, cop killer on the run. He'd hacked it, flipped her truth into a lie, and... The motel's walls seemed to close in. "He's got tech," Lena said, slamming the laptop shut. "We're exposed." Talia's mind raced. Her evidence was out, but Tate's counterpunch was a sledgehammer, branding her a fugitive terrorist. Smoke tickled her nose, faint at first, then thick, acrid. Yells erupted outside, tires screeching. She yanked the curtain back, heart sinking as flames licked the motel's first floor. A mob forming in the lot, locals with torches and bats, their faces twisted with rage. "Tate sent them," Talia said, grabbing Lena's arm, the laptop clutched tight. The mob chanted, "Murderer, get her!" A wall of hate fueled by the doctored stream. Fire climbed the stairs, heat blasting through the window as glass shattered below. Talia kicked the door open, smoke billowing in, and they bolted down. The hall coughing, flames snapping at their heels. The stairwell was a furnace, but she spotted a fire escape, its rusted ladder trembling as they climbed down. A bottle smashed beside her, gasoline splashing her leg, igniting. Lena smothered it with her jacket, shoving Talia forward. They hit the ground, sprinting as the mob surged, torches swinging, a pickup truck ramming the dumpster where the bike hid. Talia dove into an alley, Lena behind her, flames roaring as the motel collapsed, her evidence drowned in chaos. She crouched behind a trash bin, breath ragged, the mob's shouts echoing, 50, maybe 60 strong, Tate's puppets turning Harrow into a lynch mob. The chopper buzzed back, spotlight sweeping, and she knew Tate was close, orchestrating this inferno. She'd thought the stream was her triumph, a blow to Crane's empire, but he'd flipped it into her death warrant. Her arm bled through the bandage, her leg singed, but she gripped Lena's hand, eyes blazing. "We're not done," she rasped, the alley's shadows her only shield. Tate had raised the stakes. Now she was a fugitive, hunted by a town gone mad, and every step was a fight to survive. Talia Brooks crouched in the alley's shadows, her singed leg trembling under her weight, the air thick with the stench of burning gasoline from the motel's collapse. Her arm bled through its makeshift bandage, her ribs a throbbing cage from the van beating, and her torn blazer hung like a shredded flag, coffee stain lost in a mosaic of dirt and blood. Lena Pierce knelt beside her, clutching the burner laptop. Its screen dark but still warm from their hijacked stream, Sheriff Amos Tate's doctored footage branding Talia a cop killer, igniting the mob that now roared beyond the alley, torches, casting jagged flickers on the brick walls. The chopper buzzed overhead, its spotlight slashing the night, missing them by inches as they pressed against a rusted trash bin. Talia's breath came in shallow bursts, her mind racing. Jed Hargroves. Frame up Otis's betrayal, the evidence drop turned to ash. She was a fugitive now, hunted by Harrow's hate, but she wasn't done fighting. Lena's eyes darted to the mob, 50 strong, their chance. "Murderer, hang her!" A wall of fury closing in. "We can't stay here," she whispered, voice tight, curls plastered with sweat. Talia nodded, scanning the alley's end. A junkyard sprawled under the desert moon, a graveyard of twisted metal and old tires. "There," she rasped, pointing, her split lips stinging as she spoke. They bolted, ducking low, the chopper's beam sweeping past as they slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence. The yard was a maze, rusted car husks stacked high, oil drums leaking black sludge, wires dangling like vines. Talia's leg buckled, but she caught herself on a fender, gritting her teeth. "We need a trap," she said, eyes glinting with a plan. "Tate's coming. They won't stop till I'm dead." Lena set the laptop down, digging through her bag for a multi-tool, while Talia scoured the junk. Car batteries, their casings cracked but humming with faint charge, coils of copper wire snaking through the dirt. She dragged 2 batteries to a clearing, hands shaking as she stripped the wire with Lena's tool. Her legal mind swapped for survival instinct. "Rig these to shock," she said, voice low, twisting the wires into a grid across a narrow path. Lena nodded, splicing the ends, sparks popping as they connected the terminals. "Enough juice to drop a bull," she muttered, wiping grime from her brow. Talia scattered debris over the trap, masking it, then grabbed a crowbar from a wrecked pickup, its weight solid in her grip. "Lure them in," she said, stepping back, the trap a silent promise. The chopper's roar grew louder, its light pinning the yard's edge as 3 deputies crashed through the fence, guns drawn, their shouts sharp over the mob's din. "She's here," one barked, a beefy man with a buzzcut flashlight beam slicing the dark. Talia stepped into view, crowbar raised, taunting, "Looking for me?" They charged, boots pounding, and she darted back, leading them over the wired path. A crackle split the air, blue arc snapping as the first 2 hit the grid. Buzzcut and his lean partner convulsed, eyes rolling white, collapsing in a heap, smoke curling from their boots. The third froze, gun wavering, but Talia swung the E. Crowbar cracking his knee. He crumpled, howling, and she kicked his weapon away, breath heaving. "That's for the gas station," she spat, adrenaline masking her pain. Lena grabbed the laptop, eyes wide. 2 down, but Tate still out there. Talia nodded, limping toward the yard's far side, the courthouse a faint glow on the yaw. Horizon. "We hit back now," she said, the trap buying her a window. They reached a payphone by the fence, its receiver dangling, and Lena dialed a DOJ line while Talia kept watch, crowbar slick with sweat. "Carl, it's Pierce." "Lena," snapped, voice urgent. "Brooks is alive, stream was hacked. We've got Crane's docs, push the probe hard." Carl's grunt crackled through. "Filed it. Feds are moving. Get to the courthouse. New judge is inbound." Talia's heart leapt. Victory glimmered. A new judge her lifeline. She took the phone, adding, "Tate's framing me for Hargrove. Tell them he's alive. I didn't kill him." Carl promised. "On it. Hold tight." They sprinted, the junkyard fading behind them, reaching Harrow's courthouse just as dawn bruised the sky. The building stood silent, its steps empty, but a woman in a grey suit waited. Judge Evelyn Hart, her face stern but fair, badge gleaming. Talia stormed up, Lena beside her, and thrust the DOJ folder forward. "Crane's corrupt," she said, voice raw but steady. "Land grabs, forged charges. Here's proof. Arrest him." Hart skimmed the pages, eyes narrowing at Crane's. Rulings, then nodded. "Enough for a warrant," she said, calling deputies, not Tate's, to cuff Crane inside. Talia exhaled, thinking she'd flipped the script, Crane's empire cracking under federal weight. The old judge emerged, hands bound, his sneer replaced by pale fury, and she felt the tide turn. Justice, finally. But then a boom shattered the morning, a fireball erupting from the courthouse lot. Hart's car exploded, glass and metal raining down, the blast knocking Talia to her knees. Screams pierced the air, deputies diving for cover as smoke billowed. Thick and black. Hart staggered, blood trickling from her temple, shouting, "Get down!" Talia's ears rang, her vision blurring, but she saw Crane smirk through the chaos, unshaken in cuffs. Tate's voice crackled over a radio, chillingly calm. "She's a terrorist. Bombs on her." Deputies swarmed, guns trained on Talia, Hart's order drowned by their yells. Lena pulled her back, but the damage was done. Posters hit the streets within hours. Talia Brooks, terrorist fugitive. Her face plastered across Harrow, the bomb pinned on her like a death sentence. Talia stumbled into an alley, Lena dragging the laptop, her mind reeling. She'd cornered Crane, rigged. A trap won Hart's ear, thought she'd clinched it. But Crane's counterpunch was a sledgehammer. The bomb a lie so bold it rewrote her fight into a manhunt. The town locked down, choppers circling, every road blocked. She'd outsmarted Tate's goons, but Crane had flipped the board, turning her victory into a noose. Her leg burned, her arm bled, but her eyes blazed. Cornered, yes, but not broken. Crane was down, not out, and this war was far from over. Was Talia's junkyard trap pure genius, or did she underestimate Crane's ruthless reach? Comment number 1 if you think she's still got the smarts to outplay this monster. Hit like and subscribe. This roller coaster's nowhere near done. Can Talia dodge the terrorist label, or will Crane's bomb bury her deeper than ever? Talia Brooks crouched in the alley's gloom, her singed leg trembling under her weight, the courthouse explosion's echo still ringing in her ears. Smoke curled from Judge Evelyn Hart's wrecked car, its twisted frame a blackened skeleton. In the lot, while deputies swarmed, their shouts drowned by chopper blades slicing the dawn sky. Her arm bled through its soaked bandage, her ribs a throbbing cage, and her torn blazer clung to her sweat-drenched back, coffee stain lost in a tapestry of grime and blood. Lena Pierce knelt beside her, clutching the DOJ laptop, its casing scratched, but intact. A lifeline after Crane's bomb flipped Talia's victory into a terrorist label. Posters already littered Harrow. Talia Brooks, fugitive killer. Her face a grim mugshot, the town's hate now a manhunt. She'd thought Crane's arrest was the endgame, but he'd turned the tables, and she was running again. Lena's eyes darted to the street, choppers circling tighter. "We need cover," she whispered, voice hoarse from smoke. Talia nodded, scanning the horizon. A cluster of shacks huddled a mile off, their tin roofs glinting faintly. "There," she rasped, pointing, her split lips stinging as she spoke. They bolted, ducking low, weaving through backyards littered with rusted bikes and broken chairs, the desert wind biting her wounds. Her leg buckled, but she pushed on, reaching a shack with peeling paint and a sagging porch. A black farmer emerged, mid-40s, his overalls patched, face etched with exhaustion. Marcus, his name stitched on a faded cap. "So you're her," he said, voice low, recognizing Talia from the stream. "Crane took my land last year, hid you both." Relief flickered, fragile but real. She stepped inside, the shack's wooden floor creaking under her weight. The interior was sparse. A single room with a cot, a stove, and a table piled with papers. Eviction notices, all stamped with Crane's seal. Marcus locked the door, his hands steady despite the tremor in his voice. "Lost 40 acres to Harrow Holdings," he said, pouring water into a tin cup, handing it to Talia. "Crane ruled I defaulted, never did. Tate's goons burned my barn when I fought it." Talia sipped, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat, her mind clicking. "That's the racket," she said, setting the cup down. "Black farmers targeted, land grabbed. I've got proof, DOJ's on it." Marcus's eyes lit, a spark of hope. "Then I'll testify," he vowed, pulling a phone from his pocket. "Record me, let the world hear." Talia nodded, Lena firing up the laptop, its camera blinking red as Marcus spoke. "I'm Marcus Tate, no kin to the sheriff," he began, voice firm, facing the lens. "Crane stole my land, forged papers, sent Tate to scare me off. Talia Brooks is fighting for us. She ain't no killer." Talia's chest swelled, a resistance forming, her evidence bolstered by his truth. Lena uploaded the clip, streaming it live. Views climbed fast, 500, 1,000, comments flooding. "She's innocent." "Crane's a crook," Talia exhaled, thinking she'd rallied a force, Marcus her anchor in this storm. The DOJ had Crane's arrest, Hart's warrant, now this. Harrow's walls were cracking. She pictured Crane sweating in cuffs, Tate scrambling, her terrorist label peeling away under the weight of a farmer's voice. But then the shack's window, shattered, glass raining inward as a brick thudded to the floor, a note tied to it scrawled in red. "Recant or she's gone." Marcus paled, stumbling back, and Talia's gut twisted. Crane's reach, even in custody, was a venomous claw. Footsteps pounded outside, a child's scream cutting the air. Marcus's daughter, 10 years old, her braids swinging as she ran. In from the yard, eyes wide with terror. "Men took her," she cried, clutching Marcus's leg. "Said tell the truth or she's dead." Talia surged to the door, peering out. 2 figures in hoods dragged a girl toward a black SUV, her kicks useless against their grip. Marcus lunged, but Lena held him back, his fists shaking. "They've got my baby," he choked, voice breaking. "Crane's men, I know their truck." Talia's heart sank, betrayal looming. She'd brought this here, her fight now his loss. "We'll get her," she said, grabbing the crowbar from her escape. But Marcus shook his head, tears streaking his face. "They'll kill her, I can't." He turned to the laptop, still streaming, and spoke, voice hollow. "Talia's a liar, I made it up, Crane's clean." The feed spiked, views hitting 10,000, comments flipping. "She's guilty." "Farmer sold her out." Talia's breath caught, Marcus's forced lie a knife in her spine. He slumped, sobbing, "I'm sorry, they've got my girl." Lena slammed the laptop shut, eyes blazing, but Talia stood frozen, the resistance she'd built crumbling under Crane's ruthless play. Sirens wailed, closer now, and the shack's walls shook as a SWAT van crashed through the yard, its doors bursting open. Deputies poured out, gas masks glinting, tear gas canisters hissing as they lobbed them inside. Talia coughed, eyes burning, yanking Lena toward the back door as Marcus collapsed, clutching his daughter's cap. "Go!" he rasped, smoke swallowing him. They stumbled out, gas clawing their lungs, Talia's leg dragging as she ran, the crowbar slipping from her grip. Shots rang out, bullets chewing the dirt, and she dove behind a shed, Lena beside her, coughing blood into her sleeve. The SWAT team fanned out, radios crackling. "Terrorist confirmed!" Crane's bomb lie now cemented by Marcus's recantation. Talia's, vision blurred, tears mixing with gas, her mind reeling. She'd trusted Marcus, rallied him, thought his voice would tip the scales. Now his daughter was a hostage, his words a noose, and she was deeper in the pit. They crawled through the scrub, the shack a haze of smoke behind them. But the betrayal wasn't done cutting. A package landed in her motel wreckage later that day, delivered by a kid who vanished, her DOJ badge defaced with racial slurs in black marker, mailed back as a taunt. She clutched it, fingers trembling, the shack's raid a brutal echo in her ears. Crane's men had snapped Marcus like a twig, and the SWAT assault was their victory lap. She'd lost an ally, a witness, and any hope of clearing her name tonight. Lena pulled her up, voice ragged. "We've got the docs. Still a chance. Talia nodded, shoving the badge into her pocket. Her eyes steel despite the blood and tears. Marcus's betrayal stung, but Crane's machine was the real enemy, and it was bleeding her dry. The choppers tightened their net, the town a cage, and she was a fugitive twice over. Bomb maker, liar, killer in their eyes. Her leg burned, her arm bled, but she staggered on, the shack's smoke a bitter shroud. She'd thought she'd won a voice, but Crane had ripped it away, leaving her to fight a war she could barely stand in. Talia Brooks staggered through the desert scrub, her singed leg dragging with every step, the SWAT raid's tear gas still burning her lungs. Her arm bled freely now, the bandage a sodden rag, and her ribs pulsed with pain, a brutal reminder of the van beating days ago. Her torn blazer flapped in the wind, coffee stain buried under layers of dirt and blood, while Lena Pierce limped beside her, clutching the DOJ laptop, its casing cracked, but holding her last shred of evidence. Marcus's shack smoldered in the distance, his daughter's kidnapping and forced recantation a fresh scar. Crane's men had turned her ally into a puppet, his viral lie cementing her as Harrow's terrorist. Choppers buzzed overhead, their spotlights slicing the dawn, and posters of her face littered the town, branding her a killer. She'd lost everything: trust, momentum, hope, but she wasn't broken yet. Lena's breath rasped, her jacket stained, with blood from coughing. "We've got one shot," she said, voice raw, nodding to the laptop. "Crane's estate, records there could bury him." Talia's eyes hardened, the defaced DOJ badge in her pocket a taunt she'd turn into fuel. "Then we hit him where it hurts," she replied, her split lip stinging as she spoke. Crane's mansion sat 3 miles north, a sprawling fortress of white stucco and greed, guarded by wealth and corruption. They moved, weaving through back roads, dodging patrols as the sun climbed, its heat baking the sand. Talia's leg buckled, but she pushed on, the crowbar lost, her hands now her only weapons. They reached a ridge overlooking the estate, manicured. Lawns, a pool glinting blue, security cameras blinking red. "Inside job," she muttered, spotting a shed with tools and a power box. They crept down, ducking behind a hedge as a guard patrolled, his rifle slung low. Talia grabbed a wrench from the shed, its weight cold in her palm, and smashed the power box, wires sparking as the cameras went dark. Lena pried a basement window open with a screwdriver, and they slipped inside, landing in a damp cellar stacked with crates, whiskey, cigars, files. Talia's pulse spiked, her fingers tearing into a box labeled Harrow Holdings. She pulled out bank records, ledgers, photos, Crane's signature on deeds, payoffs to Tate, a white supremacist logo stamped on letters. "Jackpot," she whispered, shoving them into Lena's bag. Lena hacked a safe in the corner, her multi-tool clicking, and yanked out a USB drive, encrypted but glowing with promise. "This ties him to the ring," she said, eyes wide. Talia's mind raced. These weren't just land grabs, but a network of hate. Crane a kingpin in a racist empire. She climbed to the study, a mahogany cave of trophies and books, and found a laptop, its screen locked. Lena plugged in the USB, cracking it with a DOJ code, files spilling open, emails to state officials, threats to farmers, a plan to cleanse Harrow of black ownership. Talia streamed it live from the burner laptop, her voice steady despite the pain. "Talia Brooks, U.S. Attorney, I'm in Crane's lair. This is his racket. Land theft, white supremacy, my frame-up. DOJ, act now. Views soared, 20,000, 50,000, comments raging. Expose him. She's alive." She thought she'd won, Crane's secrets bleeding out for the world to see. Lena zipped the bag, the physical records her backup, and they bolted for the cellar exit, the estate silent but tense. Sirens wailed in the distance, feds, she hoped, not Tate's goons. They reached the courthouse an hour later, Crane's arraignment underway, Judge Evelyn Hart presiding despite her bandaged head from the car bomb. Talia burst in, Lena behind, her thrusting the bag at Hart. "Bank records, emails, Crane's a supremacist, rigged my trial," she said, voice cutting through the room's hum. Hart skimmed the papers, her face tightening at the logo, a clenched fist in a white circle. "This is damning," she said, nodding to deputies. "Hold him." Crane, in cuffs, glared from the dock, his pale fury unshaken as feds stormed in, badges flashing, cuffing him tighter. Talia exhaled, relief flooding her. Justice, at last. But then Tate struck, a shadow in the chaos. He slipped from the crowd, needle glinting in his hand, and jabbed her neck before she could react, a sedative flooding her veins. Her knees buckled, vision blurring as he dragged her out a side door, Lena's shout lost in the haze. "No one finds you now," he growled, his khaki bulk heaving as he tossed her into a pickup's bed, the cold metal jarring her ribs. She clawed at consciousness, the estate's evidence live, Crane arraigned. But Tate's move was a gut punch. Thought she'd toppled him. The truck roared off, dust choking the air, and she blacked out, waking in a mine shaft, its walls damp and black, her wrists bound with rope. Tate loomed, a flashlight blinding her, his smirk a death knell. Crane's. "Down, but you're finished," he said, kicking a pile of rocks, dust swirling. Her head spun, the sedative sluggish in her blood, but she saw it. Dynamite wired along the shaft, fuses coiled like snakes. Tate lit a match, the flame dancing as he tossed it to the ground, a slow hiss starting. "Boom," he muttered, stomping. "Out!" The shaft's mouth sealing behind him with a thud. Talia's heart hammered, rope cutting her skin as she twisted, the hiss growing louder. She'd infiltrated Crane's lair, leaked his filth, thought she'd won. Now she was buried, the evidence a distant echo as the fuses burned. Her leg burned, her arm bled, but she yanked at the ropes, desperation her only fuel. Tate's counterstrike was a tomb, and every tick of the clock was a step toward oblivion. She'd exposed the king, but his night was playing for keeps. Talia Brooks woke in the mine shaft's suffocating dark, her wrists raw from ropes biting into her skin, the air thick with damp earth and the acrid sting of burning fuses. Her head throbbed, Sheriff Amos Tate's sedative still clouding her senses, but her leg burned hotter, singed and bruised while her arm bled freely. The bandage lost somewhere in the chaos. Her torn blazer clung to her sweat-soaked back, coffee stain a forgotten relic under layers of grime and blood, and her ribs ached with every shallow breath, a brutal echo of the van beating that had started this nightmare. The dynamite hissed. Along the walls, red sparks crawling closer. Tate's trap a ticking tomb after she'd infiltrated Judge Virgil Crane's estate, leaked his supremacist racket, and watched him cuffed in court. She'd thought she'd won, but Tate's ambush had flipped triumph into terror, burying her alive. Her vision swam, the shaft's blackness pressing in, but she spotted a flare gun on the ground, dropped by Tate in his smug exit, its orange casing glinting faintly. She twisted, ropes cutting deeper, and stretched her bound hands, fingers grazing the grip as the fuses hissed louder, 10 feet away, then 8. Panic clawed her chest, but she hooked the gun, pulling it close, her legal mind swapped for raw. Survival. She aimed at a crack in the shaft ceiling, a sliver of hope 20 feet up, and squeezed the trigger. The flare shot out, a blazing comet smashing into the rock with a deafening boom, dust and stone raining down as a hole blasted open, sunlight stabbing through. The blast's shockwave knocked her flat, ears ringing, but the fuses faltered, some snuffed by debris buying her seconds. Talia yanked at the ropes, her wrists slick with blood, and snapped a strand loose, freeing her hands. She scrambled up, leg dragging, and climbed the rubble, jagged edges tearing her palms as she hauled herself toward the hole. The remaining fuses flared back to life, 6 feet now, the hiss a death knell, but she reached the lip, pulling herself out as the shaft shuddered, dynamite igniting below. The explosion roared, a fireball licking her heels as she rolled onto the desert floor, sand blasting her face, the mine caving in with a thunderous groan. She lay there, coughing blood, her body a wreck, burns, bruises, cuts, but alive. The sun searing her eyes as choppers buzzed in the distance, drawn by the plume of smoke. She staggered to her feet, every muscle screaming, and limped south, Harrow's Town Square a faint haze 2 miles off. Crane's trial streamed live on every screen. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, feds cuffing his cronies, the DOJ docs she'd leaked painting him as a supremacist kingpin. Talia's breath hitched, hope flickering. She'd exposed him, survived. Tate's tomb, and now she'd finish it. She reached the square as noon scorched the asphalt, locals gaping from sidewalks, their torches gone, replaced by stunned silence. A jumbotron blared Crane's arraignment, Judge Evelyn Hart's voice cutting through. "Virgil Crane, you're charged with corruption, fraud, and conspiracy." Talia pushed through the crowd, soot-streaked and bleeding, her presence a shockwave. Whispers. She erupted, phones flashing. "She's alive!" She stormed the courthouse steps, legs trembling but head high, and burst inside, the room freezing as she shouted, "He tried to bury me!" Her voice cracked, raw with fury, pointing at Crane in cuffs, his pale face twisting as feds turned, badges glinting. "Tate locked me in a mine, dynamite, all of it. To silence this," she said, gesturing to the DOJ files Hart held, bank records and emails damning Crane's ring. The crowd gasped, reporters scrambling, and Hart banged her gavel, eyes wide, but steady. "Hold him," she ordered, feds surging to Crane's side, tightening his restraints. Talia's chest heaved, victory in sight. Crane's smirk faded, his empire crumbling under her soot-covered defiance. But Tate wasn't done. He lunged from the back, khaki uniform a blur, tackling a deputy and snatching his gun, his bulk charging Talia before she could react. "You don't win," he roared, fist slamming her jaw, splitting her lip wider, blood spraying the floor. She stumbled, catching herself on a pew, and swung back, elbow cracking his nose, a wet snap echoing as he staggered. Feds piled in, wrestling. Him down, his gun clattering away, but not before a shot rang out. Not from Tate, but from above. A sniper's bullet punched her shoulder, a hot spike of pain dropping her to her knees, blood pooling fast. She gasped, vision blurring, the room spinning as deputies shouted, "Roof, get him!" Crane smirked from the dock, whispering, "This ain't over," his voice a venomous thread through the chaos. Talia clutched her shoulder, crimson seeping through her fingers, her body swaying as medics rushed in, their hands a blur of white and red. Feds swarmed the roof, boots pounding, but the sniper was gone, a ghost hired by Crane's unseen boss. Lena burst through the crowd, laptop clutched, her face pale as she knelt beside Talia, pressing a cloth to the wound. "Stay with me," she begged, voice shaking, while Hart's gavel slammed, ordering Crane held without bail. Talia's head lolled, pain drowning her senses, but she saw Tate cuffed, his grey eyes burning with hate, and Crane's smirk falter as feds dragged him out. Blood soaked the floor, her blood, but she'd crashed his trial, exposed his mind trap, and turned Harrow Square into her battleground. She'd won, or so she thought. The medics lifted her, stretcher creaking under her weight, and carried her out, the crowd parting, phones still flashing, her name a chant on their lips. She'd survived the shaft, stormed the court, and broken Crane's grip, but the sniper's shot was a warning. Someone bigger lurked, pulling strings she couldn't yet see. Her shoulder burned, her leg buckled, but her eyes stayed open, locked on Lena's, a silent vow to keep fighting. The courthouse faded behind her, sirens wailing, the square a blur of shock and awe. Tate's last stand had failed. Crane's rain was cracking, but that bullet in her flesh screamed a truth. This war had deeper roots, and her blood was just the start. Talia Brooks jolted awake on a stretcher, medics swarming her as sirens wailed, the Harrow courthouse fading into a blur of smoke and chaos. Her shoulder throbbed, the sniper's bullet a hot coal buried in her flesh, blood soaking her torn blazer, coffee stain long lost under layers of grime and crimson. Her leg burned, singed and bruised. Her arm bled freely, and her ribs ached with every ragged breath, a brutal tally of the van beating, mine trap, and mob assaults she'd survived. Lena Pierce ran beside her, clutching the DOJ laptop, her face pale but fierce, shouting over the din, "You're okay, stay with me." The square buzzed with stunned locals, phones flashing, reporters scrambling as feds hauled Sheriff Amos, Tate and Judge Virgil Crane away, their cuffs glinting in the noon sun. Talia's crash into Crane's trial, her soot-streaked stand had shattered Harrow's corrupt heart. She'd won, or so it seemed. The medics rushed her into an ambulance, doors slamming as engines roared, speeding her to a hospital 10 miles. Out. Her vision blurred, pain drowning her senses, but she gripped Lena's hand, voice a rasp. "Crane's down. Tate too. Keep the stream live." Lena nodded, propping the laptop on her knee. its cracked screen glowing. Views hit 1 million. Comments raging, "Hero! Crane's finished!" The DOJ docs she'd leaked from Crane's estate, Marcus's testimony before his betrayal, her own mineshaft escape, all streamed worldwide, a tidal wave of truth. Medics cut her blazer away, stitching her shoulder, fluids dripping into her arm, but she stayed conscious, watching feds raid Harrow Holdings offices on a newsfeed. Assets frozen, cronies cuffed. Crane's supremacist ring was crumbling, Tate's mine trap exposed. She'd broken them, blood and all. They reached the hospital, a sterile box of white walls and beeping machines, wheeling her into a room as Lena briefed DOJ brass on the phone. "Full review, statewide," she said, voice sharp, pacing the hall. Talia lay back, bandages wrapping her shoulder, her leg propped, exhaustion sinking into her bones. Hours later, she testified via video, propped on pillows, her face bruised, but unbowed. "Virgil Crane ran a land grab, targeted black farmers, framed me with Tate's help," she said, voice steady, the camera catching every scar. "Bank records, emails, threats, it's all public. End this." The feed cut to Crane's conviction, life without parole, Hart's gavel slamming. Tate's too, 20 years for attempted murder. Harrow's square erupted, cheers mixing. With shock, the town's rot laid bare. Talia exhaled, relief flooding her, thinking she'd clinched it. Crane's empire dust, Tate's cage locked, justice clawing through the muck. Feds swept the state, arresting developers, deputies, even a mayor tied to Crane's ring, the DOJ probe spreading like wildfire. Lena sank into a chair, laptop closed, her curls a wild halo. "We did it," she said, a tired smile breaking through. Talia nodded, her stitched shoulder easing, the hospital's hum a rare calm. She'd survived a diner brawl, a rigged trial, a mine blast, a sniper. Her blood on Harrow streets had bought this win. The defaced badge sat on the table, slurs of fading taunt. She'd turned it into a weapon and they'd lost. But then a nurse slipped in, her scrubs crisp, eyes darting as she adjusted Talia's IV, her fingers lingering too long. She leaned, close, breath hot on Talia's ear, slipping a note into her hand before vanishing out the door. Talia unfolded it, paper trembling in her grip, scrawled in black ink. "You took down pawns, the king's still watching." Her stomach dropped, pulse spiking as she scanned the room, spotting a red dot blinking in the smoke detector. A hidden camera, its lens a cold eye. She'd thought Crane was the top, Tate his muscle, but this was deeper, a shadow beyond Harrow's. "Dust!" Lena leapt up, grabbing the note, her face hardening. "They've been tracking you, every move." Before Talia could speak, Lena stormed out, returning with a DOJ agent. Carl, the gruff ex-Marine, his jaw tight as he read the note. "We've got a problem," he said, voice low, pulling a tablet from his coat. "Intercepted chatter. Crane's. Ring ties to a federal mole, someone high. They've been feeding him cover, watching you since the diner." Talia's breath caught, the room tilting. Every fight, every leak, shadowed by a puppet master she hadn't seen. Carl swiped the tablet, showing emails from a ghost account to Crane, orders to silence the attorney, timestamps matching her arrest, the mine, the sniper. "DOJ's compromised," he said, eyes narrowing. "We've got a traitor inside." Talia's mind raced, pain fading under fury. The diner wasn't random, her arrest planned, Crane a cog in a bigger machine. She'd won Harrow, but the war stretched wider, a racist hydra with heads she couldn't yet cut. Lena slammed the table, the badge rattling. "We hunt them," she said, voice steel, but Talia grinned, a fierce, weary spark igniting. "Then we hunt the king," she replied, sitting up, bandages tugging her stitches. Carl nodded, pocketing the tablet. "Start with the mole, quietly. They'll come for you again." Talia clutched the note, crumpling it, her bloodied hands a vow. She'd flipped defeat into defiance, and this king would fall, no matter how deep he hid. The hospital hummed on, medics bustling, but Talia's eyes stayed sharp, scanning the ceiling, the hall's every shadow a threat. Crane's conviction replayed on a muted TV, locals cheering in the square, but the camera's red dot blinked, a silent taunt. She'd shattered Harrow's cage, freed Marcus's voice before his loss, survived Tate's tomb, yet the real enemy watched, waiting. Lena pulled a chair close, laptop open, already tracing Carl's leads, her fingers flying. "They think you'll quit," she said, glancing up, a grim smile matching Talia's. "They don't know you." Talia leaned back, shoulder aching, but her grin widened. She'd bled for this, and she'd bleed again to finish it. The sun dipped outside, casting gold through the blinds, Harrow's dust settling as feds swept wider, arrests piling up. Talia's phone buzzed. DOJ secure line, Carl's voice crackling. "2 senators linked to Crane's cash, warrants out, it's spreading." She nodded. The badge's slurs a badge of honor now, her fight a spark igniting a blaze. The king thought her broken, a pawn crushed under his board, but she'd flipped the game. Harrow was just the start, and every step now was a hunt, a war she'd wage with every breath. The camera blinked, the note burned in her mind, and she whispered to the shadows, "Come get me." This wasn't the end. It was her beginning, a U.S. attorney reborn in blood and fire, ready to take the throne. Talia Brooks's relentless battle in racist judge rules against black woman, stunned when she reveals she's a U.S. attorney, unveils profound truths about courage and systemic injustice. Her journey teaches us that resilience can topple even the most entrenched corruption. Facing a rigged trial, brutal ambushes, and betrayal, she never surrendered, turning every blow into fuel for her fight. It's a stark reminder that one voice armed with truth and grit can spark change, as Talia's evidence shattered Crane's empire and exposed a racist network. Yet her story also reveals the chilling depth of prejudice, not just in Harrow's dusty streets, but in shadows reaching into federal halls, showing how racism adapts, striking harder when cornered. Marcus's forced recantation underlines the human cost, where fear can silence even the brave, a lesson in the power dynamics that protect oppressors. Talia's victory wasn't flawless. The sniper's bullet and the mole's camera prove justice is a marathon, not a sprint, demanding vigilance beyond a single win. Her defiance, bleeding but unbowed, inspires us to question who pulls the strings in our own systems, urging us to stand, speak, and fight when the odds stack high. Above all, it's a call to unite. Her triumph leaned on Lena's loyalty and a farmer's fleeting courage, proving collective strength cracks the toughest walls. What will you do when injustice knocks at your door? Comment below if you'd fight like Talia. Hit like, subscribe, and share to spread this fire. Thanks for joining this battle. Stay fierce and keep pushing for what's right.